got a LinkedIn message from someone I did not know, and she said, I have a friend who lost one of her best friends to suicide, and her husband found your book, Perfectly Hidden Depression, on her bedside table. It's about depression that is camouflaged by really a seemingly perfect life. It's not going to be long before all of us know someone or know someone who does know someone who has died by suicide and their life seemed like it was going great. Destructive perfectionism is like being on a treadmill where you have no control over the power or the speed or the incline, and you can't get off. If you watch that TEDx, I actually was having a panic attack from the waist down, and my legs started trembling. And I will tell you, I curled up, or I just held my glutes so tight that I could actually barely move. They won't fit the criteria for depression, classic depression. They just don't fit it. And they can go to a therapist, and the therapist can even say to them, you don't fit criteria. You know, you're not depressed.
Have you ever looked at someone whose life seemed flawless, successful career, beautiful family, endless accomplishments, and wondered, how do they do it all? And what if the very people we admire most are the ones most at risk of quietly breaking? In today's episode, psychologist Dr. Margaret Rutherford invites us into a conversation that is both urgent and tender. She names what so often hides behind achievement, a form of perfectionism, so consuming it can drive even the brightest stars towards despair. These aren't the people who collapse openly. They're the ones who keep running, keep producing, keep shining, while secretly losing the will to live. This is not a story of weakness. It's a story of how culture, worship of success, can turn deadly, and how choosing transparency over performance can bring us back to life. So lean in, because what you'll hear today may just change how you see yourself, your colleagues, and even those you love most. Enjoy. Well, hello, everyone. We have another super amazing guest for you. We have the beautiful Dr. Margaret Rutherford. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. And you did really well on that last name.
I got a bit of a tongue twist
It's
then.
hard.
Yeah. So welcome. So the way that we love to start the show, Margaret, is we always love to ask our guest, what inspired you to do what you do today?
I was not always a psychologist. I actually was a professional singer in my 20s and was having a good career in that. And yet I had started volunteering at the battered women's shelter in Dallas, and I found sort of this calling there. And then I found out that living the life of a professional musician was not the same as just loving singing. So I was attracted to music therapy, which led me to clinical psychology. And I've been now a psychologist for over 30 years. And what I love about it is such a great honor to be in a room with a person where they are trusting you, where they are actually talking about things that maybe they've never told anyone. And there is a kind of relationship there that really exists nowhere else. And so I get to do that many days of my week. And of course, this has led to other things now, but I absolutely have loved being a therapist and a psychologist.
I love that, and it's not from the receiving end, I guess, to as a client. It's not always easy to really open up.
Oh,
They obviously trust you straight away, because I've heard some people have had not great experiences. Where they
oh
felt
yeah.
like this level of resistance.
hmm
Mm.
Well, you can, you really have to have a relationship with your therapist that feels like they get you. They really get you. And because you're right, it is for some people like swimming with sharks. I mean, it feels very, very dangerous. I'm a therapist because I got good therapy. My 20s was a decade of chaos, and I made so many mistakes. And it was a very good therapist that helped me out of that and helped me see my mistakes and begin to step out of them. So I wanted to be like that person. And I am very blessed that I was able to do it. I think I got into my program because they never had a professional singer try to be a psychologist. So in fact, I had a big band gig the night that I did the audition or the interview, sorry, for the graduate school. And they said, "You're doing what?" And I said, "I'm fronting a big band tonight at this big hotel in Dallas." And they said, "Well, that's interesting." And I literally think they let me in out of curiosity, which was fine. I'll get in any way I can.
And you found a way to blend your music with the work that you do, correct?
I did at first. Music therapy, I enjoyed it, but at the same time, it wasn't exactly what I wanted to do. But certainly, at first, when I first started to practice, I saw teenagers and I used what I had learned in music therapy a great deal with them.
And what is that exactly? Like what, I mean, I've heard of it. I don't really know. What is music therapy?
It's using music like any other medium to try to make the therapeutic experience, to deepen it, to make it more meaningful to the person. You can have art therapy, you can have recreational therapy, occupational therapy. I mean, all those things. So, but music is you can either have people write music, create music, listen to music. There are all kinds of things. And actually now, or at least when I was in graduate school, which was a long time ago, there were studies about showing how music actually affects you at the cellular level. And I think probably, I mean, I haven't studied what music therapy does in a long time, but I imagine they've gone more in that biologic direction. And it was fascinating to see the way your cells actually vibrate differently to different musical genres. And that was probably if I'd stayed in music therapy alone, that would have been the direction I would have gone.
Oh, absolutely. There's all those different vibrational frequency sounds that you can
Yes.
listen to as a way to drop you into alpha or into a different state of mind. And you know, it's
Yes.
funny. We were talking about France before we got on, and I remember one of my cousins was saying to my son, the best way to remember a language is to listen to the songs and listen to the words, and that's how you'll recall
Mhm.
through music. You will always recall the words. And I thought that's really
Interesting.
fascinating.
The words or the actual pronunciation and the sort of the lilt or the
Both,
of the language.
both.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Because it's
Hmm.
if you think about it, when I mean in Australia, for example, if you are a very young starting school and they teach you French at school, you'll always remember the songs.
Ah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. In
yeah,
the United States, that would be unfortunately Frere Jacques.
yes,
Constantly,
yes,
yeah.
yes, yes. Frère Jacques, absolutely. And the other thing too, before we came on the show, we were talking about your TED talk. Did you want to maybe unpack that for our audience?
I would love to unpack that. I will tell you the story behind my getting the opportunity for it's a TEDx talk out of Boca Raton, Florida, here in the United States. And I got a LinkedIn message from someone I did not know, and she said, I have a friend who lost one of her best friends to suicide, and her husband found your book, Perfectly Hidden Depression, on her bedside table. What in the hell is perfectly hidden depression? I want to find out about it. And so I became friends with the woman that had reached out to me, as well as her friend who had lost the woman, her friend, to suicide. And she had me come speak to some people in Boca Raton. Well, it turns out the original woman who reached out to me was a co-organizer of TEDx Boca Raton. If you don't know what TEDx is a TED, of course, is an organization that invites thinkers who it's about ideas for spreading is their mantra. And TEDx began when local communities wanted to produce their own TED Talks. And so to be a TEDx, an official TEDx, you have to have the blessing or you have to follow certain guidelines of the TED Talks. Those being things like, you have to have, it has to be memorized, you stand on a red dot, you, it has to be an idea we're spreading. It can't be more than usually 15 or 16 minutes. And so you send in ideas for this, and then they either accept it or not. And I didn't get accepted the first year that I interviewed for it or sent in my submission, but I did my second. And we called it How to Recognize Perfectly Hidden Depression. Perfectly Hidden Depression is the name of my book. And it's about depression that is camouflaged by really a seemingly perfect life, where the person who is living that life has learned to shove pain away, far away, except that you really can't shove it away. It is in your being somewhere, it's in your mind somewhere, and it grows more potent. And actually, what we're seeing is a rise in the rates of perfectionism and suicidal ideation and suicidal attempts and even quote unquote success. And it is very alarming because, as I said in the TEDx, it's not going to be long before all of us know someone or know someone who does know someone who has died by suicide and their life seemed like it was going great. And so I am passionate about this message, and I kind of discovered it in 2014. Anyway, we can talk more about that later. So I did this TEDx. I had no idea. I'd never done anything like this before. I had no idea how the message would be received. Well, it has almost 2 million views as of one. It's close to 1.9, and if it keeps going in another month, it'll be 2 million, which is quite unusual. And when you read the comments about it, it's heartfelt and it's heartbreaking in some ways. But for my, I'm not a celebrity. I'm not a well-known person in the United States at all. I'm the author of Perfectly Hidden Depression, and that book has done fairly well. But was such an honor to do the TEDx, and it has made it possible for me to reach a lot of people that would never be reached.
That is amazing. And you speaking about that, just last year, my son lost a couple of friends, and it was such a shock because on the outside, everything seems fine.
Fine.
And they didn't even know that it was that bad for them. So
No.
I mean, how do we even ourselves? Because I've heard that those that really have the deep depression don't talk about it, and when they find a way out, it's almost their happy place. But those that talk about it don't actually do it. I don't know. I've heard that quite
I don't think
often.
that's true. I
What
don't
are your
think that's
thoughts
true.
about that? Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think some people who talk about being suicidal are suicidal, and they can get closer to that and actually attempt and then kill themselves. So when they talk about, that's an old saying, if they talk about it, they won't do it. And I don't think that's true. In fact, I've had a couple of patients who have been suicidal and they talked about being suicidal. The What I like to say is the one of the hallmarks of perfectly hidden depression is an inability. Well, one, your life is really governed by this perfectionistic streak and having to be very successful and to achieve and to be seen as an achiever and to be counted on to be the responsible one, to be the one who's always, there when you need them. I mean, they're very caring toward other people. What they do not know how to do is express, to be transparent, emotional transparent, to be open about what they struggle with. They don't know how to do that. And in fact, sometimes they don't even have the vocabulary. And there's a reason for this, Catherine, that, it's they either grew up in a home where that wasn't allowed, or it was demanded that they say more, you don't cry, you don't get angry. They could have been abused or neglected themselves, and or then there was alcoholism in their family or drug addiction, so they learned to keep secrets. They could have grown up in a family or a culture that demanded achievement from them, and they've learned that the only way I really get loved is through my achievement, so they get stuck there. Uh, a lot of minorities will tell me that they had to be perfect to even be considered for the role or the job or whatever it was. So, at least here in the United States. So there are lots of ways to get there, but I think the predominant factors are this very perfectionistic, in fact, it's called destructive perfectionism, where you stay. I mean, one of the guys I respect the most in the field says destructive perfectionism is like being on a treadmill where you have no control over the power or the speed or the incline, and you can't get off. So you're constantly going from task to task to task to job to job to job and having to do all of those exceedingly well. And so it is people have come to me now as patients or clients who have read or about my work, and they said, I know I'm this person, and it's going to be really hard for me to even open up to you because I don't even know how to do it. And gradually we make it happen, or it does happen. It can evolve. So it is, I think, not that clinical depression, plain old good, clinical depression and with all its symptomatology isn't important for us to focus on. But the people with perfectly hidden depression, as I term it, will not look depressed. They won't fit the criteria for depression, classic depression. They just don't fit it. And they can go to a therapist, and the therapist can even say to them, "You don't fit criteria. You're not depressed. You're a little anxious, maybe, but you're not depressed." So as a profession, we need to understand that this exists as just and our loved ones. If they never talk to you about, let's say their parent dies, or their best friend moves away, or they've lost a job and they just are always, no, I can handle this, I got this, I got this. And you might say to them, you can't have everything. You've got to struggle with something. I see that you never talk about that. And it's noticing what's not there rather than what is there sometimes.
So you're saying that perfectionism is almost like a mask worn by the wounded? Without it's almost like, because I'm relating to what you're saying right now as being a perfectionist. I am a perfectionist, and I'm constantly on the go. And I sometimes I think, what drives that perfectionism?
Yeah. I don't want to knock perfectionism in general. There are two distinctions that are really important. There's in the research, there's one called constructive perfectionism, and that is the one that's much more process oriented, that can say, I'm going to take my family on a hike, and we really want to go see this waterfall. But we get 2 hours or an hour into the hike, and somebody's ankle hurts, or it starts raining and you have to turn around. And so the constructive perfectionist would say, well, we still had a good time, and we'll see the waterfall next time, A destructive the perfectionist will say, well, that was a bust. Why did we spend our time doing that? We could have done something else. We should have looked at and seen that it was going to rain. I mean, there's this sense of, if the activity isn't accomplished, the task isn't accomplished, that's not good enough. If you're the chairperson of a local fundraiser for a nonprofit and you don't make as much as they did last year, then it's a failure. rather than you saying, well, at least we made $27,000. We made 30 last year, but remember this and remember that. So it's there's a lot of shame and fear that's underneath a person with destructive perfectionism because they are having to prove to themselves that they're in control, that they can exceed expectation. There's often somebody's voice in their head saying, you'll never amount to anything, or whatever it happens to be. And they're fighting that voice that tells them, I'm not sure you're really who you think you are. And so they're fighting that voice all the time.
So it's almost like there's a light and shadow of perfectionism.
I'm sorry, what?
It's almost like there is a light and shadow aspect of the perfectionist.
You
The
can think
way
of it
it's
that way. Sure.
the way that we look at the outcome.
Yeah, you could say that.
That's really good. So how do we, because we do live in a world where, and especially working in corporate. So I think about productivity, we've got to achieve this. And so
We
being
love
like that,
perfectionists in the corporate world. I mean,
yes.
they get there before everybody does. They leave after everybody does. Oh, sure.
Yeah. So then how do we begin to honor pain without feeling like we're failing?
Well, the fact that you even asked that question says something about maybe what you were taught or whatever, because talking about pain that's what I call transparency rather than weakness. When I first started writing about this, frankly, I got some feedback and it wasn't very positive, about you are pathologizing resilience. You're pathologizing being stoic. And I said, no, there's nothing wrong with resilience or stoicism. Absolutely nothing wrong with it, except when it is your only option. I'm going to push my way through this. I'm going to get through this no matter what. All of that's fine. But if that's your only option, if you can't also say, and by the way, it was hell getting here, or I had a struggle with this or a struggle with that, then you're not allowing some of your own vulnerability to be expressed because you don't know how. There's a thing called toxic positivity that's out there big time. And it's when these people can only think of their gratitude, and they write in gratitude journals, and then they write in a gratitude journal, I can't believe that I was sad yesterday. I'm not being grateful enough. Well, maybe you were having a sad day. I mean, okay. It's okay to have a day where you're kind of sitting with your sadness. Do you want to be there every day? Probably not. And if you are, should you maybe seek help for that? Probably. But at the same time, I mean, I'm a very perfectionistic person as well. But there's some days I have to say, wow, I'm tired, or I'm not sure I can, get much accomplished today. And that's okay. Not for destructive perfectionists, but it's okay for me, certainly.
Absolutely. And I can relate to what you just said. I think that also there's a real big piece on vulnerability. Like I used to say that to be vulnerable was a sign of weakness, whereas now to actually stand in my truth is a sign of power and strength. Because when you do, I think what you're doing is you're showing up as a human. And then
Exactly.
two, you're actually giving other people permission to do the same instead of trying to
Exactly.
be, you know, everything's perfect, everything's fine. And I think also talking about vulnerability, what is the difference between emotional leakage and vulnerability?
Hmm. What do you mean by emotional leakage?
So vulnerability, so there is a level of, some people might be like exposed too much. Like what is the level
Oh, oh,
of the vulnerability? It's like you said, it's like it could be as simple as, actually, I'm really tired, or I can't do this. I need some help. I need some assistance.
right.
But then where's that fine line? Because sometimes there's also, I hear a lot of people say, oh, maybe you said too much, or maybe you didn't have to, empty your whole way of thinking on the
Sure.
table right now in a meeting
Sure,
kind of thing.
sure. Okay. Yeah, I've heard that term, but I didn't know quite what you meant by it. Well, I mean, that's not, I mean, that is sort of a boundaryless kind of issue where you're venting to the point where you're not aware enough of that is too much too soon. You don't really, the person that you're saying this to doesn't know you well enough or hasn't offered that kind of thing. And so you're taking advantage of that person's ability to listen to you. And that is a boundary issue or a neediness. I need to share this rather than I'm choosing to share it. I've actually started using the term transparency a lot more than vulnerability. And I'll tell you why. Because I do think vulnerability has scares some people. The word meaning that means I'm weaker than someone else. You are vulnerable to illness. You're vulnerable to attack. You're vulnerable. The way we use the word in our language does suggest that there is a inferiority or a need for protection versus transparency, which is more about if I trust you and I have to find someone I trust, and I'm going to ask you, I'd like to be more transparent in the relationship. Would you do that with me, or however that happens? I mean, that sounds a little therapy to do it that way. When I first started on social media, for example, I had a big decision to make. I've been married 3 times. Two of those happened during that horrible decade I was telling you about. I've now been married 34 years. I have panic disorder. I had panic attacks that started in my late 20s, and I have a history of anorexia. And was I going to talk about that? And I thought, well, I don't really want to. That was 9 or 10 years ago. And it scared me, frankly. I mean, I thought, who wants to come to a psychologist whose life has been that screwed up? And yet what I have found is exactly the opposite, that transparency people have said, I trust you because you're willing to talk about things that you feel some shame about, that you've had to struggle with, that you've hated about yourself, that you've had to learn from. And it is, when we can give that gift to one another, that's not vulnerability. That, in fact, I feel stronger for having done that. Brene Brown, a famous American researcher, talks about if you reveal what you feel vulnerable, and her word is vulnerability, or I would say transparent about, you actually take back your power. Because nobody can say, well, Dr. Rutherford, I heard you've been divorced twice. Because I've already talked about being divorced twice. It's like, okay, yeah, you're right. So you have a question? Versus if I'd never talked about it, then, I'm setting myself up to be I'm setting myself up for some kind of questions that would embarrass me or that I would have to avoid. So I'm actually pulling my power back in by talking about those things.
I love the way that you talked about that. I could
Ah,
relate to vulnerability for me. It was in 2012 in New York. I had a panic attack, which I thought was a heart attack, and then was
mm.
riddled with panic, anxiety, and I was told I had anxiety disorder. And I kept it to myself. There's so much shame around it because
Oh,
being
me
this
too.
powerhouse, and I was afraid to be judged and all of those things. What will people think of me? I'm meant
Oh,
to be
yeah.
this person helping other people, and I can't even help myself. And
Yep.
then I remember one day I was having a drink with a friend and was telling the story. She goes, we should, and she was actually a journalist. She goes, we should publish it. And I said, oh yeah, why not? The next day I so regretted it, Margaret.
Yeah.
But you know
Oh,
what?
I bet.
That was the turning point for me. And that's where vulnerability for me was to stand in my truth and actually talk about some of the things that
Mhm.
I'm not perfect. I do experience anxiety. And so the more that I become transparent, like you say, which is such a much more open word, isn't it? Transparency.
Yeah, I like it a lot better.
It's really allowed a different conversation and different people have come into my life because of that.
Hmm.
So I
Oh
love that
yeah.
fact that you say that, because you know what, there's this thing about staying strong, and I see this a lot too. Like, I think there's a cost associated to wearing the persona of being strong all the time. What are your thoughts?
Oh, I couldn't agree more. Um, I'll never forget when I was in graduate school, I had not shared yet with my colleagues. I really hadn't talked about my panic disorder with many people at that point. But we were meeting as a group, and it was about 2 or 3 months into our first semester, and I decided that I would share with them that I had performance anxiety or panic disorder, bordering on social anxiety. And I I told them, and one woman's immediate response, who actually later became my best friend in the program, she said, "So you're not who you've led us to believe you are." Because I appear extremely comfortable with myself. And I know how to do that. And I looked at her and I said, I just wasn't ready. I had to face my own shame about it in order to talk to you about it. This is a big step for me. I've not told my family knows, and that's it. And we later, she understood later, and she actually had a secret she was keeping herself. That was much more about her reaction than anything to me. And I have been afraid of that. It was one of the worst things that could have happened. And yet it was one of the best things that could have happened, because in having that reaction, I had to handle it right there in the moment.
So, if you don't mind me asking, actually, so how did you move through that and be where you are today? Is it something you still dance with, or is it something
Oh, yeah.
that, yes?
If you watch that TEDx, I actually was having a panic attack from the waist down. I call my panic Bob, and I had hoped that Bob wouldn't show up and would leave me alone. I'd taken some medicine. I thought maybe, okay, Bob's not going to attend. But Bob came on right before I started talking, and my legs started trembling. And I will tell you and your listeners, Catherine, I I curled up, or I just held my glutes so tight that I could actually barely move. And you'll notice I'm sort of trying to move in the speech from my left to my right, and I kind of have to jerk because I am so determined not, that the panic won't come into my whole body. And I actually did it. But when I walked off, and you don't see this on the tape, it was kind of like I was sort of like Frankenstein, because I couldn't walk because my glutes were so tight. Um, and so, yes, it is still very much a part. I've gotten used to doing these podcast interviews, and I've gotten used to doing a lot of things that I don't take any medicine. I don't have to. I'm fine. But if I do something new, then I take maybe a little medicine, and then I've learned some calming techniques and that kind of thing. But Bob was definitely there on the day of the TEDx.
I love it. I'm the same, exactly the same. And mine's Roger. So there you go. So I love the
Ah,
fact that
Roger.
yeah. So
There
there
you
you go.
go.
And I'm also still dancing with Roger every now and then. And but the thing is, like when I actually unpacked it, I was
Mhm.
thinking, well, what is the purpose of this anxiety? Like,
Great
for it to,
question to ask
so what is
yourself.
the purpose of this anxiety? And the purpose of this anxiety is for me to take a break without feeling guilty. And I was
Mhm.
thinking, well, what's the secondary gain here? What's the benefit? What am I getting from it? And then I thought, well, I'm getting assistance, because every time somebody knows I call it having a moment. So instead of saying I always say I'm experiencing anxiety, I get people to help. And what's it protecting me from? It's protecting me from completely just stop it. Because that's the thing. That's about going back to the perfectionist. Go, 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 go. I have to,
Yep.
get this done. So
Yep.
for me, I can see, I can see why it comes up when it comes up. Instead, I could
Well,
just say, I need help and I need a break.
yes, exactly. Exactly. And, anxiety, most emotions are signals. They are signals to us. And anxiety is the same way. So, when I start getting anxious, I know I'm too tired. I know that I'm overwhelmed. I've taken on too much. And in that moment, it was simply the pressure of the moment and me wanting to do very well. And so, because I so believe in this message, and so I shouldn't really have been surprised that Bob showed up.
I love that. I love that you shared that. Thank you so very much. There was one thing too, that there's a saying, healing is in the telling. So it's what you're talking about. It's about being transparent and talking about it. And yet we don't do it because A, we judge ourselves, and B, we are fearful of being judged. That's why I was saying to you, like, it must take a level of courage to actually say, yes, I'm going to go and see, or seek help in some way, shape, or form.
Hmm.
So, how do we
It
take
does.
away that shame in being transparent?
Well, I think you have to ask yourself, it'd be helpful to ask yourself, where did you learn that? I certainly didn't grow up in a family. I mean, none of my family had therapy. I was the first one to seek therapy. Um, we didn't grow up being allowed to be angry. I had a very nice family, good family in many ways. But your question brings to mind a case that a woman, not a case, I hate that I saw very early on in my psychological career. And I'm going to talk about sexual abuse, so I'm going to warn your listeners because they might be triggered. She came in and she was a real swashbuckling kind of looking person. She had on cowboy boots and she worked on a ranch. And she came in and she sat down and she started talking about being sexually abused by her father. And I listened and we talked about it. And we talked about the sense of shame she had about it and her fears of other people knowing, et cetera, and how it had affected her life. And she left. She came back in the next session and she said, I have something worse to tell you. And I said, okay. And she said, my father made me sexually abuse my brother. And she told me about it and I listened. And we talked more about the situation and that she was a child and she was doing what her father told her to do for fear of other consequences, etc. Well, she canceled her third session. And I was quite concerned about her. We'd opened up this huge box of secrets. And I called her and I said, well, I'm concerned that you've canceled. She goes, well, I'm doing much better. And I said, well, that's good, but can you at least come in another time and let's talk about it? She said, sure. Well, Catherine, she walked in and she sat down. She looked like a whole different person. And I said, well, tell me about the cancellation and what that's about. She said, I always thought I knew when I told someone about me sexually abusing my brother, I knew what their face was going to look like. I knew that I was going to get disgust, that I was going to get contempt, that I was going to see anger, that I was going to see blame. And she said, when I saw your face being understanding, I can't remember exactly what she said, but compassionate. And she said, it's like a huge weight dropped off of me. And she came in another couple of times, but I will never forget that session. And what I learned, what she taught me about the importance of having someone listen to you that's not going to judge. That in fact, they see you as the victim frequently rather than the other way, not as the perpetrator, but as the victim. And so I share that story with you and your listeners because that hopefully with a good therapist is what happens. Not all therapists know what they're doing. Not all therapists can handle talking about trauma. Not all therapists, you know, they're not all lawyers are good lawyers. It's a profession with its own flaws. But a great way to find out if somebody is to ask around, say, who have you seen and who, you have to admit you're looking. But, it's a great way when someone says, I could have talked to him or her about anything and I felt so understood. So, not necessarily always agreed with, but that I felt understood and accepted.
Shame is such a word that's very much thrown around, and I know that we all experience it in some way, shape, or form because it's like you said, the shame of being judged and shame of even the meaning we give it, right? And so just to be able to express ourselves, and I mean that goes back to what you were saying before. It depends on our upbringing and whether it was a learned behavior. Like, for example, you grew up in a family where you couldn't express your emotions. So then how
Right.
do you unlearn suppressed emotions? Because we've all been there and we all do it. We all have suppressed emotions. How do we go about unlearning the suppression of emotions without the shame,
By
without
by
the
risk.
judgment?
I mean, it does take risk, and it takes courage, as you were saying a few minutes ago. It takes bravery. It takes finding at least one person that you know has kept confidences. They may not have kept your confidences, but you know them as being someone who can do that and has that ability. And, one day you say to them, I never talk much about myself. And they'll look at you and go, yeah, I know that about you. And you say, well, I'd like to try to learn how. Now, this doesn't have to be a therapist, it can just be a person. And they'll go, okay, well, I'm all ears. And you go, no, no, no. That's the first step that I told you that I don't know how to do this very well. And when I'm ready to take another step, I'll let you know. So it is in the sharing of who you really are, what you really experience, that you can start to grow and trust that, there is no, that whatever shame you've been carrying for what you've done, what you've experienced, what you haven't experienced, what you haven't done, whatever that happens to be, the debilitating thing about shame is it's different from guilt. Guilt is remorse that you've done something, said something, whatever. And you're sad about the act of doing that or the decision to do that or the choice to do that. Shame is I am a bad person because I did that. It invades your whole sense of yourself. And I know because I carried a bunch of shame around with me for years. And it's what actually led me to make other shameful decisions because I was letting it invade who I was, and I kept making bad decision after bad decision. So when I began to drop the shame, finally, with the help of family and friends and my now husband of 34 years, I could let go of that. I could start probably what was, not until my mid 30s and early 40s did I begin becoming, I think, who I could be. And I'm still growing and still curious about that person. So
How do you because I'm there's obviously I got triggered with a couple of things that have come up for me. How do you just let go of shame? Because I know for me, shame, there's a couple of things I still hold on to, and I know that for me that the more at the time when it took place, I was hanging on to it. It felt like it would took over my whole presence, and I was shameful about everything and anything. And the moment I started making more peace with it, now have I let go or made peace or let go of it completely? No. So how do we just let go of shame?
you don't just let go of shame. It's much more complex than that. It takes time, it takes practice. I'll be driving to work. And I've shared with you before, I'm 70 years old, and I'll be driving to work thinking about something that happened 25 years ago. And all of a sudden, I feel shame coming on, like, oh, I wish I hadn't done that. It was really stupid. Why did I do that? I'm embarrassed. I wonder if they still remember. I don't know if they still remember. Well, should I ask them about it? No, I don't want to ask them about it. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. And the question I've learned to ask myself is, Margaret, on this day, in whatever month or year it is this a helpful conversation to have in my head to me today? No. It is not helpful today. It's not going to make me a better therapist. It's not going to make me a better person. I feel that was a bad time in my life. I made some stupid decisions. And okay, there you go. It's not all of me. And it's not helpful for me to think about them today.
Yeah, I
But you have
like
to
that.
practice over and over and over because those shaming voices are like a machine gun. They'll just keep coming at you.
Yeah, so true. I think for me, it's when it pops up, like I said, it just comes up.
Yeah.
I always and then I get caught into a loop of the narrative of the whole shame story, and then I'll ask myself, is there any evidence to back up some of your stories? And a lot of the times it's not. It's just you get caught
Yeah.
in the loop and there's no evidence. But there's a that for me was a real big forgiveness piece. I still haven't quite forgiven myself 100%, but there is a little bit of I think a lot of that compassionate understanding that you were younger, and and trying working through the whole forgiveness process was the way that. But I still can't. That was a long time ago, by the way. I still can't completely let go of it. It does come and haunt me every now and then. Mm.
Well, and so I'm glad you're working on it because that will be an important thing. And, a lot of the emotions research that's going on now certainly stresses the idea that emotions are important, but they're not real. They're not fact. So, oh, I feel this way, so that must be the truth. No, not necessarily. So, we can't, it's not healthy to think, this is the way I will always feel about this, or this is the most true way to feel about this. Emotions are passing. Your sadness passes, your happiness passes, your grief passes, your anger passes, and in its place comes another one. And so if you practice not sitting around in shame and you let the next emotion be, it's a very Buddhist kind of way to talk, actually. When I'm not necessarily, I guess I'm more Buddhist than I think I am. But anyway, it's a very helpful gift to give yourself to say, yeah, I've been really stupid. I've made some mistakes. I've hurt some people. They've hurt me. I've irritated some people. They've irritated me. And okay, that's life.
Yeah, it's funny that you said about Buddhism, because I also very much, if I had to pick one specifically, it would be Buddhism. The thing is, you're right. Emotion is energy, emotion. So that does pass. It doesn't, it's up to us and we hang on to it and we keep it alive. So I do love the fact that you've said that. I was thinking of, I'm not sure if you know of David Hawkins' work. He was talking, David Hawkins, he's no longer, he transitioned some time ago, but he talks a lot about emotions. And he was saying, he talks about the fear is very much a future emotion and guilt a
Oh, yeah.
past, in the past. Yeah. So when you were talking about that, I was like, I wonder where shame sits on his vibrational
Well,
frequency map.
there's a funny saying that is kind of a southern, I live in southern Arkansas and or southern United States. And they say if you got one foot in the future and one foot in the past, you're pissing on today.
I love that. I love that. I so love that. That's awesome. So,
Yeah.
Margaret, I am so conscious of your time. So, before we go to our three shiny golden nuggets, is there a question that I haven't asked you? Is there something that you would like to express before we go to our three shiny golden nuggets?
I don't think so. You're a wonderful interviewer, frankly, and I so appreciate that we've just kind of had this very natural conversation. I told you before we started recording that I've been on certain podcast interviews, and I can tell they have their list of questions, and no matter what I just stop talking about, here comes the next question, and it's not very natural to me to talk that way. So I appreciate you just letting us talk together.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So let's go to our three shiny golden nuggets as we wrap up the show. What are those three shiny golden nuggets, Margaret, that you would like to share with our audience?
We've already actually talked about a couple of them, but I will reiterate. One is to how do you practice emotional transparency? And again, how it's different from vulnerability or feels different from vulnerability. And I believe you just start with one person. You start with the one person that you believe will hold a space for you and hold an emotional space for you that's safe. And I don't care if you tell them, you know, I don't cut my toenails often enough. I mean, if that's something you're carrying around with you that bothers you or that you feel shame about, I think I thought about that because I just spent the weekend with my son and he was talking about he needs to cut his toe. Sorry for the graphic example. But, I don't care how small it seems. Nothing, when you're learning how to be transparent, no fact or thing you decide I'm going to try to be transparent about this is too small. You start out wherever you are, and then you take that and learn how, in increments of whatever you're comfortable with, learn how to be more transparent. The second thing is that I believe, again, very much in the line of what we've been talking about, that a lot of people will say to me, well, I've got to feel this way or that way. It's either this or that. It's either a right or wrong. It's either helpful or not helpful. And I will say it's an and. We are all human beings. I have sadness and I have joy. I have worry or anxiety and I have hope. It's not because, oh, I'm anxious, that means I'm not a hopeful person. I can be both. I can be both actually concurrently. I can be both at the same time. I don't have to, one does not obstruct the other one from being part of me. And I think when we try to say I have to be this or that means I'm that, that we really what's the word I'm looking for? We narrow our identities because, oh, I have to be this because I can't be that if I'm this. No, yes, you can be. You can be an and. The third thing is my own working definition of self acceptance, which, if anybody's had the kindness to listen to this entire interview, won't come as a surprise to them. My working definition of self acceptance, which I believe is part and parcel of healing, is that recognizing that neither your strengths nor your weaknesses completely define you and vice versa. So, one of my strengths is curiosity. I think that's a strength I have. One of my so-called weaknesses is anxiety, or let me say something I haven't said. One of my weaknesses is impatience. I can be a very impatient person. I don't think either my curiosity, which I love about myself, and my impatience, which I don't particularly care for about myself, neither one of those things defines me completely. Again, not an either or, but an and. So self acceptance, recognizing that neither your strengths nor your vulnerabilities completely define you, and vice versa.
I love all three. I absolutely love all three. When we talk about healing, it's really it's an ongoing thing, isn't it? It's not just a destination. It's not something you do once. It's something, because I quite often I have clients will say to me, Catherine, I thought I was done with this. And I'm like, no, we're never done. I think it's one of those, it's a dance. It's one of those things. And when it comes up for a reason. So thank you for all three.
You're welcome. And one of the things that, I mean, I've had people say the same thing to me, and one of the things that I have decided after doing this for 30 years, over 30 years, is that we don't really ever completely rid ourselves of those things that Carl Jung would call complexes, that are things in our beings that are our vulnerabilities or whatever. What you get, it's kind of like a piece of gum stuck on a tire. It's going to keep coming around every now and then because it's stuck. And what you get better at is recognizing how it's affecting you. When it first started happening, you didn't know how my impatience, how that affects me. Well, now I have a better idea. When I become impatient, I go, oh yeah, this is that impatient thing I don't like about myself. Learn some skills in dealing with that. It's not that it won't come back, it will. I'm way too into time management. And so a little obsessive about it, in fact. So, it helps me to recognize I'm going to feel impatient again, or I'm going to feel selfish again, or I'm going to feel jealous again, or I'm going to feel enraged again, whatever it happens to be. And then you just get better at giving yourself some grace about it, and learning handle it better and excuse me, work with it better.
So true. I love that analogy. Now it's going to be, I'm a visual person, so now I'm going to remember that. The gum on the, it's so
Gum on the
true.
wheel.
I love
Yes,
it.
it's a graduate school kind of thing that I learned, the gum on the wheel.
Absolutely love it. Thank you for that visual. So, Margaret, where do you hang out the most? I know you have a podcast. We'll have everything in the show notes. Where
Sure.
do you hang out the most?
Um, well, I'm writing a second book, which is actually a workbook for the first Perfectly Hidden Depression book. It's called the Perfectly Hidden Depression Workbook, quite naturally, and that will be out sometime in the fall, probably the late fall. Again, published by New Harbinger. My website is drmargaretrutherford.com, and I get a lot of traffic there. My podcast, as you said, is called the Self Work Podcast. And I do that weekly and have for 9 years, which I absolutely love doing. And you can email me at askdrmargaret at drmargaretrutherford.com. And I will read your email. I can't answer all of them, but I will read it. And I often bring those emails and those questions and comments, anonymously, of course, into what I talk about on the podcast.
Love it. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time, your energy, and showing up today. It's been beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine, so much.